Hey, welcome everyone to another ARCS chat. My name is Robin Bauer-Kogo. I'm the Association Manager for ARCS, and I'm coming to you from the Florida Keys. A couple quick technical notes just before we start today's chat. As always, there is a slight delay between the Zoom meeting and when it pushes out onto YouTube. So just know that there's a little bit of delay between when we're talking and when it actually goes out. I'll be moderating the chat the entire time. So if you guys have any comments or questions throughout it, please just go ahead and throw it in the chat. You will want to be signed into your Google or YouTube account in order to participate in the chat. So heads up on that. A couple of quick programming notes coming up. On June 8th, we are doing a meetup for ARCS for EMPs. So if you're an emerging professional and you want to join in with a bunch of folks on Zoom meeting to talk about some of the challenges that EMPs are experiencing, just what is an EMP today? I encourage you to sign up for it. If you go to our website, arcsinfo.org, go to the professional calendar, you will find the link to the event and you can sign up for it. Also, a save the date on June 22nd, we'll be doing a speed virtual meetup for networking for mentors and mentees. It's a new program. We're probably going to be opening up registration pretty soon for that. But if you are looking for a mentee or a mentor, I encourage you to go check out the description for that. It's going to be June 22nd. And another quick note too is that our website went through a slight refresh. So if you want to go over to the website, check out arcsinfo.org. We moved some stuff around. We made it a little bit more streamlined. There's some great resources on there now. So I encourage you to go and click around and see what you can find on the website. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this over to Amanda Robinson, one of our ARCS chat hosts, and we will see you during the question period towards the end. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Robin. Hi, guys. My name is Amanda. I'm coming to you from the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I'm going to pass the mic over to John.
Hey, I'm John Robinette. I'm a freelance collections manager based in New York City. And today we are going to talk about the past and talk about the future. We've all been through a lot personally and professionally in the last year. And you know, the pandemic, which has obviously struck the entire world, has forced big changes on both areas, professional and personal. And we are hoping that these are positive changes, but even more importantly, we hope that we can be protagonists for positive change. Regardless of what those changes are specifically, we want to contemplate on this last episode of this ARCS Chat season if those changes are part of a larger pattern. What have big events in world history signaled or instigated in the past, and what will they teach us as we move forward? So here to discuss this issue is the gentleman who's explored the macro and the micro of the collections profession throughout his career in book, article, and classroom forms. Today I'm happy to introduce John Simmons and welcome him to ARCS Chat. John has authored many articles and books on and about the profession, but perhaps his greatest hits include Things Great and Small, Collections Management Policies, as well as the co-editor of Museum Registration Methods 6, which just came out. So please welcome John to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we're going to start out with the past today. So specifically, what did we learn and what did we see 100 years ago in the 1918 influenza pandemic, and also are there other world events that created massive ripple effects in the way we operate as our collections profession?
Yeah, the 1918 Spanish flu, as it was popularly called, was actually an H1N1 flu, which is not that different from what we're dealing with now. It was interesting. It was the estimation on world dead is 50 million people. And I've noticed quite a number of old photos showing up of people wearing masks at the time, which we didn't really see those photos in the past when we talked about the flu, because the emphasis has always been on the mortality rate. But it did shut down public events worldwide, and including in museums, because a lot of places had to completely close down. And it's very little is known because people just didn't keep very good records of what happened, but we know that public life did take a backseat to the epidemic, especially in the big cities as the flu raged. It's interesting too. We can look at, I think, the two world wars as another instance in which museums, particularly in the United States and mainly in Europe, had to either change their hours or close completely. World War I was really interesting because there's a lot of photos around of the places where the entire museum staff was devoted to the war effort in some way. And often public galleries were closed, and there's a lot of photographs of volunteers preparing bandages to be sent into the field for the soldiers and what have you. And also in World War I, it was fairly common for the museum staff, and in those days it was largely male, to have formed their own militia units and start training on the museum grounds. And this happened in the US and all over England. And a lot of those within the Guard, as the war continued, those guards would go and enlist as a group. And so the museum would be suddenly bereft of employees, of quite a number of employees who would go off to the war. And there are also some interesting photos of a few museums that closed their galleries and converted them into hospital units in England. And so there are public galleries filled with hospital beds and nurses. And similar thing happened in World War II, although not nearly to that extent. I think World War II is far more of a lot of the museum staff were drafted or joined up and disappeared from their museum roles in that way. But I think those are all instances we can look back to and kind of wish we had a little more information about how the museums coped with that disruption. I think it's inevitable that there will be another pandemic, and probably sooner rather than later. And so I think it behooves us to try to see what we can find out about those instances, and also examine a little more carefully what we all did during this one. And it's as soon as the pandemic became obvious, and everyone has a story, I think, about the day that they suddenly discovered they couldn't go back to work anymore, because most of us, it did hit that quickly. Within a matter of a few days, we went from working in our offices full time to no longer being allowed in, and none of us were really prepared. And I think in addition to pandemics, we need to look at failures of infrastructure and communication due to hacking or all kinds of communication breakdowns can happen. I think one of the lessons we've learned here in the US is that our communication systems and pipeline systems are not very well prepared for this sort of thing. We had the bad weather in Texas. We had the pipeline shut down, a number of these that indicate it wouldn't take much to have a major communications failure, civil unrest, all of those things. So Toni and I, when we finished Museum Registration Method 6, we were really happy with the book. We thought it was pretty complete, and almost immediately realized, we needed a chapter on what happens during you have a pandemic. Right. But who would have thought of that? And of course, we should have been a little more realistic, I guess, and thought about 100 years ago. But that led us to talk about what would we have put in that chapter? What would you include? And so some of the things I was thinking about were beware of what you leave undone at the end of the day. If most of us have projects that continue more than one day, but do we leave those in a situation where they can just be suspended? We should make sure that in advance we have offsite access to our collection data, which many people I know did not have offsite access, and they were at home and they could have done work on their database. So they didn't have access. I think another huge problem was people did not have offsite access to environmental monitoring data, or did not have permission to go in. And I know a lot of museums where they were restricting what staff could come in, and this was something out of the museum's control. And this would be civil authorities, or in the case of university museums, university authorities. But, arrangements need to be made well in advance so that the people in charge understand that it's really critical for the collections care staff, at least some of them, to come in, do environmental monitoring, integrated pest control, that sort of thing. You need permission to come in and make regular inspections, because most people outside of our world don't understand that museum collections don't just sit happily in storage. They need to be checked regularly. You need to be in there, every week, making sure things are okay. And I think another lesson out of this is we need to cross-train our staff, because who fills in for you when you're not there?
Yeah.
and a little bit of cross training with key staff members so that people can fill in for each other to some degree when they're out. Because what if only one staff member is allowed in? Who is that person going to be? Is that going to be an exhibits person, a collection person, an educator? But cross training would help a lot. They would know a lot more about what to do. Security is another big issue. And there's one when I teach, I always give my students a series of I talk to them about a series of testing things you can use, like the ODDI test and the tests like that for different kinds of materials. And I always bring them around to the ultimate, which is the bus test. And that is, if you're a collections person and you're working at your desk and you walk out the front door and get run over by a bus, can another collections person come in the next day and figure out what you were doing, where you were in the process of accessioning or cataloging or taking things into storage? And if the answer is no, that you would depend on your knowledge of your systems and that you have failed the bus test. Your systems, your procedures should be transparent, should be written down so that another person can fill in. And I think a lot of us realized our museums were not passing the bus test in this pandemic when you'd have one person allowed in. So I think there's a lot we can learn, and I would like to see now that things are returning to normal, before we get too quickly back to normal, that we think about these things. And I think that's an important one, because a lot of people have said, we will never go back to normal. Well, yes, we will. And for that, we have only to look at 1918 pandemic. That raged for 2 years, but very quickly we did all go back to normal. And I think we'll do the same now. So before we forget these key lessons, it'd be kind of nice to sit down and chat as a group and see what all lessons were out there that we could learn.
Oh, that's such good information. I think one of the key things that you say there is you're suggesting to look both ways before we cross the street, but then also the transformation of the museum into something else that it was generally not intended to be. I know that we've seen it now, where many of our museums and have been converted into vaccination sites. And if you're listening right now and your museum was converted into something similar to that, whether it's testing, vaccination, etc., please chime in and let us know how that worked and how it affected your collections. Write it in the chat if you don't mind, and just sign into your Gmail or YouTube account in order to participate in the chat. So I think what my first thought is that part of the plan? Like, are museums prepared to make that transition into whether it's vaccination testing or something else, hospital, etc.? I mean, is there a plan for that? And if you do have that sort of a plan and you're listening, please write in and tell us what that is.
Those are really good points. And I think one thing we might particularly take a look at is museums in rural areas, because I know they are more likely to be community centers as well as museums. And there's a good lesson from Puerto Rico on that, how some of the Puerto Rican museums function basically as centers of communication for their community. Yeah. And we might find some really good examples of how the community would turn to the museum and those responses as a central meeting place, as the only place open, as the only place big enough to group people together. And we should look at some of those too. So if you're particularly a small rural museum and you served a greater need during the pandemic, it would be really interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would be interesting. I know that the museums typically have the advantage of having large open spaces in some spots, and in the same way that you can use a lobby for a wedding or a reception of some sort. It's not inconceivable that it could be, okay, here's our event plan, and that event could be an emergency event as well as a happy event. So
there's another aspect to that too, which is there are a number of accounts that after 9/11, in the immediate aftermath of that, museum visitorship went up. And I think in large part based on some interviews I've read, because people needed a place to go and just be quiet and think. Mm-hmm. And I know that happened particularly in museums in New York City. There's a number of accounts of how visitors came flocking in, but I think it happened all over the U.S. that people turned to museums in this time when they needed a place to be contemplative and reflective and remind themselves of the good in the world. They would come into our museums, and that's something else we should be prepared for in those events.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you need a plan for everything, and that's what we do, right? So, um, so I so what do those lessons from the past actually mean for us as we look forward? I mean, as you said, there's probably not the last pandemic that we're gonna experience in our lifetime. Hopefully, it's not a pandemic. Hopefully, it's more isolated than
Right.
that. But I mean, we've had these close calls before, so what are the you mentioned some of it, but what else can
Yeah.
we learn?
Well, there's some other things too. I know a number of museums have gave up supplies of gloves and
Mhm.
alcohol, for instance, in natural history museums during the pandemic, to be alcohol to be converted to hand sanitizer. Gloves, because those have a shelf life anyway, and people needed them badly. And I think knowing what supplies you have on hand and keeping closer track of your inventory would enable you as a museum to contribute that way. I think another lesson that we learned probably the hard way was, so you're going to work at home for the
Yeah.
next unforeseeable. What can you do?
Yeah.
And some people were more successful than others at this. I think it would be interesting if we all kept kind of at least a mental list, if not a paper list, of what we could do during a shutdown. So there's a lot of research on collections and the objects in our collections that we can do through the internet, for example, that we don't have time to do during our normal days. I think everybody has that frustration of we accession some really interesting object and we just don't have time to look into it like we would like to, but that would be a time to catch up. We can do a lot of prep and planning for upcoming exhibits for after we reopen.
Yeah.
And I know that we've done a lot of that in our museum. It's a great time to go over your database if you have access and correct it, update it, look for problems, populate your database with more information. There's a number of things you can do, but you need to have access. You need to be prepared to do that from home. And I think if many of us, if we had time to think it over, we could have been better prepared to make better use of our time at home.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so that leads well into my next question, which is, I mean, in a way you answered my response to it, which was, my next thought was like, what have you seen in the last year that you never thought you would see? And I would have said, that many people working from home and continuing to work. Anything else that you might add to that?
Ooh, that's an interesting one.
Amanda, you wrote this question. What's
yeah,
your
Amanda.
response?
Oh, can you say it one more time? Because I was reading the chat really quick.
Oh, yeah. No, it was just like, what have you seen in the last year in collections that you never thought would be possible?
Oh.
Did you have something in mind when you wrote that?
Well, one of the things I was thinking about, and you were just speaking about it, John, is the ability to do work from home and to have remote access. At my current job, we already had the infrastructure in place. So it was a seamless transition to working remotely and offsite. But at my previous institutions, it was a huge step to make that possible for other staff. And so that's kind of where I was thinking in terms of putting that question together for those institutions who never thought they'd ever let their staff work from home. Now that's just commonality at this point. What other things like that have developed in the past 15 months or more?
I mean, think about it. Like if we do see the beginnings of another outbreak of something like this, now in theory, we can turn on that new way of working and hopefully, just immediately send people home and continue to work, as opposed to, staying at work and potentially, spreading the infection more, maybe helping to fend off a pandemic level situation.
And I think there's a lot of planning that we can do that when we have time to stop and think. For instance, if you have good photographs of your collection storage arrangement and how things are done, you can look at ways to better house your objects, better support them. It would give you time to sit down online and go through catalogs, what's new out there in terms of materials, of literature, what you can really get down and analyze if you can get access to it, your past environmental monitoring records. This is a really good time to see how your building responds over the course of a year or over a course of the last 5 years, look for potential problems. There's a lot of that kind of thing that we would all like to do, but normally we put off during our day-to-day stuff because we're all too busy. But if you're working at home and you've got more time to think and be reflective, you can do a lot of planning for when you do reopen, things you can make that will really improve your operation. But that, to a certain degree, requires arranging for access to your database and to your research materials before you get locked out.
Yeah, for sure. Amanda, since you did say that you were looking at the chat, is there anything happening over there that we should know about? Any
Well, we
questions?
just got some feedback to our question about becoming a vaccination site.
Oh,
and it
yeah.
looks like one of our listeners did have it happen at their institution. They were a testing site rather than a vaccination site for a few months. And they were able to do it because they had a large public space that was sealed off from other museum staff and what have you. So they said that they had very little impact.
Well, I mean, having a space like that that's sealed off or easy to seal off, it's just like a few entrances is such a gift. And, whether that's from a frat party or from, a virus, it's equally important, right? So, I mean, keep that collection safe.
But no, I think that is something museums are good at, is bringing large numbers of people through the building, and that's something that museums can contribute to. And something like a testing site or a vaccination site, in many instances, could be set up with. But again, it takes a little bit of planning ahead on that. But
yeah,
certainly that's something museums should think about.
Here in New York at the Museum of Natural History, it was actually almost a marketing event where you could come and get your vaccination underneath the giant blue whale, which is such an iconic thing for the museum, and so it became really easy to market. So
yeah, and those things work for audience building too, because I think most museums that have had events that only tangentially relate to their museum, like a cocktail hour or something, have found that a lot of people come back after they come to the museum for a specific event. They will then come back. I know the experience of most university museums is if they allow their space to be used for receptions and award ceremonies, they get a lot of people coming back later because they discover the museum for the first time. And
yeah,
I think it would work the same way with events like that. If you were doing testing or vaccinations or something, you would have people come back later to visit. And so you would be really building audience for the long term.
Yeah. So, we're sort of getting to one of the critical professional disruptions that we've all experienced here, which is digital technologies. We're all having to adapt and learn those in a way that we didn't necessarily before, and whether that's, web chats or, video chats, or just like you say, database access, et cetera. So that's one of many. Say, the courier discussion has been a massive one for everybody. Also, social justice has been extremely big because obviously in the middle of the pandemic, we had the death of George Floyd and all of the ramifications and all of the dirty laundry that came to light as a result of that. And so now we're addressing that as well. Deaccessioning became a huge issue. And with all of this, now that everybody, is working from home or has been working from home, work-life balance has been sort of in the balance, if you will. So, we can talk about I want to talk about most of these things. The first, how has the digital technology aspect, facilitated this? I mean, how we couldn't have really done this work from home thing without it, right? I mean, it's
yeah, and I think it's also drawn attention to the digital divide, because those of us that were privileged enough to have digital access at home could continue to work at home, and many people, even though they might have been able to if they had decent Wi-Fi lines, couldn't work at home because they lacked the ability to have the home equipment. And in many cases, people are totally cut off. And it's bad enough in the United States. When you get out of the United States and travel, for instance, in Latin America, you find far less digital access, particularly available from people's homes. I think we realize how useful digital can be, And because certainly, I mean, most of us have spent way too many hours on Zoom and looking up things on the internet. But the digital also has a dark side as well, which is the cost of using digital access for everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think we have to look at that both ways. I think the pandemic has shown us pretty much the upside of digital in terms of we can entertain ourselves, we can do our work, we can access to our collections. But we began talking about how digital would create a paperless society, back in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And of course, it hasn't really happened. And although it's a good idea in principle, we are now looking at a new situation, which is we have so much information digitally, we have a huge cost. So 40 years on, we're having to store a lot of data, and we're also losing a lot of data. I mean, right now, we really can't read a 20-year-old digital file in most cases. And anyone my age or close to it has had the experience of created files that they can no longer access. You find that box of 3.5-inch discs in your closet, and all you can do is recycle it. You can't really read those. And of course, the worst of all is we thought of the paperless society as a way to save the environment, but it's having the opposite effect. Your carbon cost for creating a document on paper is a one-time thing, essentially. You've got the cost of paper and printing, and then you've got minor storage cost. And that document is then available for the next 500 years if it's in good condition and can be read. But digitally saving things is enormous, and the carbon cost of that is staggering. The estimate currently is that for 1 gigabyte of digital information and storage, it's 2.25 kilograms of CO2 a year. And when you think about the amount of material that we're storing digitally, and you start thinking about all the museum records that you might be creating digitally, most people are now using a database, of course, and many museums have gone to a fully digital catalog. Those things become really important to save, but cloud storage is really running up the environmental cost of storage. And I think we need to rethink what we keep on paper and what we keep digitally. So I think this is an opportunity to think through this too. We've got, cloud storage is actually massive buildings full of servers that require immense air conditioning supplies to keep cool, and it's a big energy source. And so I think we need to think about, as we think about the benefits of digital, we need to think about those downsides and find a better balance. I think we have gone way too digital in some ways for too long.
Yeah, I think what you say there is important balance. I'm crossing my fingers that the intense demand for energy here is going to push us towards renewables, a better way to sustainably generate that energy. Because like you say, whether it's the HVAC costs alone, we all know that that's a huge culprit for our museums and our institutional carbon footprints. I mean, it pushes the bucket. So I think that's going to be a huge factor as we move forward. So I want to, there is a question that came in through the chat, and I think it kind of relates to what you're saying here, and that is sort of tying this into collections management policy. The question is, as a teacher of collections management policy, what would you include in a policy as a result of what you experienced in the last year, in particular, anything you hadn't thought to include before? And I think this technological one could be part of that.
Yeah, it certainly would. And I I would emphasize the importance of getting procedures written down, that bus test thing again, so that everyone can figure out what you were doing. And I would certainly encourage people to work on a really good digitization policy. What needs to be digital and what doesn't? We all know that digital files are far easier to work with and to share. And that is a massive advantage. But out of that information, what should be recorded in a more permanent way? And I think I would try to find a way to write a more clear policy that would separate out what needs to be saved long term and what doesn't, and how should we go about doing that. And I would also then try to make it a matter of policy. I think the one thing I have not advocated including before is cross-training of staff, so that people can at least help out with another person's job, if not step in and fill the ranks. I mean, you can't expect your educator to be a registrar or your registrar to be an exhibits installer, but you can certainly train them better so that they can help each other out in a crisis.
Yeah, but you're ruining my job security, John. I mean, if I'm the only one, it's important. No, but I think it's you're exactly right. I mean, I work with a collector now that has a lot of time-based media work, and they and they work with a specialist that can both maintain and document that. I mean, this is not just hard drive stuff. This is way more intense, and the specialists use the term with me, geographical redundancy, and I think that is super important so that we have if the server goes up, the server farm goes up in flames, we don't lose the data, right? So, in a way, having a paper and a digital version is the same thing, right? And so having that, I wrote a collections management policy, basically, copying from your book for this collection, and that is a part of it, right? It's just making sure that we have things in multiple locations, that so if we lose the actual certificate of authenticity, we'll have at least a digital version. So
yeah, well, I think we can get together as groups and particularly the staff within an institution and talk about these issues more. I know from the point of view of a collections manager or registrar, we want everything on paper, on hard copy permanently, and we're going to keep all those copies. Yeah. And of course, that is kind of absurd. On the other hand, if you're an administrator, you want everything digital, and somewhere in between is where you should be. And right. I think the only way to get there is to all sit down. Your front end people, your back end people, your administration, and discuss the issues. What do we really need permanent? What do we need digital? What do people need to be able to? What do people need to know to help each other out in an emergency? Because I don't think we're all really prepared for those sorts of things.
Boy, does that seem like a moving target. So, sort of tied into that, you mentioned the digital divide, which sort of bridges us into this discussion about social justice, which this is a battle worth fighting on every front, and it seems like it has started to do that. Is there a way to codify that and better that practice in our policies as well?
I think we can by writing policies that encourage people to record more information about objects, object history, certainly instituting diversity statements as a major part of your museum's recruitment and hiring system are good. But I think the main thing is to not be presumptive about information and interpretation of objects, to keep as open a mind as possible. When databases, computerized databases first came in, and basically in the mid to late 80s in museums, we were all fairly limited by the amount of information we could put into a database because memory in those days cost money. And that is not true anymore. Despite what I've just said about the cost of keeping digital files, we can include a lot more information a lot easier. But yet many of us are still thinking in terms of limited memory. And we should be thinking about oral histories that can be recorded and linked to objects, about other kinds of records, about doing more thorough library searches. Not all information about objects is digitized. A lot of it's still on paper, and we need to spend time researching those sources. And certainly when we're getting things brought in a community museum, talk to the community that brings them in. Get more information from artists. Wouldn't it be nice if museums had a policy of when they obtain works from a living artist that includes an interview with the artist? I know in Mark Schimmer's chapter in MRM6, he talks about the importance of art with getting an interview, preferably a video interview with artists in their studios when you acquire works by living artists, because this is invaluable information. And I think the same could be said for objects coming into any kind of museum. And I think the diversity issue is a big one in museums right now. I began teaching museum studies classes 30 years ago, and the first class I taught was predominantly female. We had one or two male students, and I think one person of color. And I just finished a class, teaching a class this semester, and it's more or less the same ratio. It hasn't changed a lot. And this says to me, we're not doing a very good job of recruitment. I looked at a lot of diversity efforts, and I'm kind of frustrated that we're trying to kind of do diversity from the top down. People keep looking for a diverse leadership, thinking that is what's going to bring diversity about in the museums. And we really need to be recruiting. We need to be finding ways to reach out at the level of junior high and high school, especially high school, college, to a diverse group of students to show them that museums are welcoming places to work, interesting places that can be intellectually fulfilling jobs that we need a diverse group of people brought in, because the way to grow diversity in the field is the bottom up, by recruiting a more diverse workforce and providing opportunities. Museums could provide professional training for their staff and let people that are working in the staff move up. I would wager that many museum guards would love to be educators if they were given the opportunity and opportunity to do a little more training, for instance. And I think we really need to pay attention to that to recruit a more diverse workforce. I'm not sure how we go about that, but we need to make people aware of the museum jobs. We joke that if you watch TV or the movies, you're aware that museums have three kinds of employees: directors, who are always evil; curators, who are always the murderer; and the guard, who gets it in the first scene. And no one else works in the museum. There are no educators, there's no conservators, there's no registrars. None of that staff exists. It's a director, a curator, and a guard. And that's what people see in popular culture. And we need to find a way to get over that. Maybe we need a TV series about behind the scenes in a museum.
The registrar.
Yeah, we can cast you and Amanda in those roles, and but seriously, we need a way to make public that there are a lot of other jobs in museums than just the ones you see portrayed in the media.
Well, a lot of times, and the diversity conversation, and it happens outside of our industry as well. They talk about the pipeline. Well, the qualified people aren't there, right? It's just like you work with what you have, or whoever applies to the job. It's about the pipeline, but obviously people they've directed the pipeline in one direction, and they haven't opened it up in other directions. So I think that's where we're gonna go with this. I think having that as part of your doctrine is going to be important.
And I will credit museums for making an effort in this direction. The current emphasis on having paid internships is very good, because unpaid internships are extremely limiting, especially if you're a big museum in a big city. Who can afford to support themselves for a semester of an internship? So I think having paid internships is a big step in the right direction, but we need to do far more. And I think at this point, it is obvious the pipeline is not going to load itself. Museums need to find ways to reach deeper, to fill that pipeline with the best and the brightest students coming along, and make sure that they understand that there are jobs there for them.
FYI, historically black colleges and universities
exactly
museum studies programs too. FYI.
That's right.
So anyway, so let's I want to bring Robin back in and see if she has anything to fill us in on about the chat. I don't know if I used my articles correctly there.
I think you were pretty close.
Prepositions.
There's been actually some interesting, just talking about more about the, actually Amanda started a good conversation just about topics on paper versus digital records and their long-term environmental and preservation impact would be very interesting at a conference session, which a couple people agreed with that. It's funny too, because when you guys were talking about that aspect, I remember when I started out in this field, 20 years ago, it was very, let's keep the paper, the digital thing's a little scary, you know what I mean, at that point. And now we're seeing more and more of the digital side of it, but part of us still wants to keep the paper things around. Like, you know what I mean? Just to be sure, the old school registrar, the books and that kind of thing. There's also a talk about when you guys were talking about like apprenticeships and stuff like that. Our beloved Raj Solanki up at the Hirshhorn talked about hybrid positions, apprenticeship programs, looking at those models. as possible things to help out with gathering people from communities that we haven't reached out to before would probably be a really smart idea.
I just read a statistic about something like 56% of interns get offered a job. That, that is, I mean, 1 in 2 interns get a job from their internship. So
that's profound.
It cannot be denied. So,
yeah. Well, and I mean, I know, again, like the idea of a paid internship when I started out a bazillion years ago was like unheard of completely. Now you're seeing it more and more, but it's still like a weird unicorn type thing, which is kind of shocking,
right,
in a way, when you think about people trying to do, cost of living and stuff.
By the way, ARCS has an internship stipend that you can apply for.
They are working on it. There's going to be announcements mid-June.
It was in the ARCS update.
It is in the ARCS update, but it was talking about how they're going to be announcing more. But yeah, but they started an internship program with the stipend, which is going to be institutions have to agree to it. But it's pretty exciting because they're trying.
Well, I think a big concern in museums is this person going to fit? Are they really a museum person, and are they going to fit in with us? But if you've had an intern for a few months, you pretty well know the answer to that, and I can understand why that many interns get hired. That's, in fact, you've proved it's like being a probationary first-year person, but it's a lot less expensive to hire an intern and pay them a decent salary and then hire them regularly than to go out and recruit.
Yeah,
in the end, this is a cost saver for museums, and you're hiring a known quality.
People don't talk about it costs to hire people. It costs real money, and not just an internship, for example. I mean, it literally costs you money. And so, try before you buy. This is your chance.
They also wanted to highlight that the Broad has a great program for internships and those kind of.
Oh, they have an art handler. What's the term? A program to encourage diversity amongst art handlers at the Broad in Los Angeles.
Yes, thank you.
So.
Yeah, that's pretty much what's been going on. And I just wanted to shout out that I do think with this digitization, I've always been very jealous of how libraries can talk to each other, right, across their catalogs, and how they have these kind of catalog systems that you can know, like interlibrary loan, another library has another copy of this book and you can get it. And I keep hoping that someday museums will also have that capability of being able to talk across collections and knowing in a safe, secure way. But I keep hoping as we approach that.
I think we're getting there slowly, but the museum digitization or digitizing catalogs started copying the libraries back in the 70s. And we have pretty well followed the library model, but the disadvantage being we lack classification systems that lend themselves to that sharing. But I think we are getting better if you look at nomenclature 4.0 and the standardization of scientific nomenclature and natural history. And there's a number of other types of museums. You look at the Getty indexes that are available, the thesauri. I think we're getting there, just not as fast as we would all like. But that would be the goal, wouldn't it? To can you imagine if you want to buy a home, and let's make up a place like Greenville, Illinois. I don't know if there is one, but we're going to call it that. Wouldn't it be cool to go online and look at all the art, the natural history, the history, everything that's ever been collected there that's in museums, to know what that's going to be like? I mean, to me, that would be really interesting. If you're an art historian, wouldn't it be kind of nice to be able to know what the environment was there 50 or 100 years ago? And if we had that database that Robin's talking about, a WorldCat for museums, we could do that. That would be really cool.
Any investors listening, email info@arcsinfo.org and we'll make this happen.
We will.
Robin has some free time on her hands. So.
Yeah, sure do. All the time.
We'll put Robin in charge. But this does raise an issue of where we're headed in the future, because this is, I've been in the business now a little over 50 years, and I realize that I'm going to be kicked out of the business soon. So I think a lot about the future. And I will say that every time I get to be panicky about the future of museums, I teach a class and I have a whole bunch of really good students. And as happened to me this last semester, and I'm reminded again, we're in good hands. We've got a really smart generation coming along that will probably solve all the problems we have made for them. But I think, looking at long-term trends, I think we are looking at some things that are concerning. And one of them that is collections are growing. very
Yeah.
rapidly in size, and the objects in them are getting older, and yet budgets for collection care are not keeping up. And we are going to have to do more with fewer staff.
Yeah.
And that's something that we can plan for and do it right, or we can let it happen and have a disaster. And I think that means better training for your collection care workers, which is everyone from your registrar and collection manager through your art handler and all of those people. But also in terms of how we are select our collection storage furniture. Do we buy furniture designed for easy monitoring of the objects or not? What kind of environmental monitoring can we do? Can we provide stable environments? Can we provide these in a sustainable fashion? We're all going to be looking at more offsite storage, because most of us have outgrown our footprint, and the uncalculated cost in offsite storage are always transportation to and from, the packing objects up and moving them, and the staff time involved, and whether that offsite storage is staffed or not. So I think these are issues that we have coming up that if we start planning now, we can deal with better, or our next generation of students. I love to bring these up to my students and tell them, this is your problem, not mine. I will be out. But it is a problem that we all need to think about and face. And I think if we are better prepared, we can face it better.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if you're out there and you're listening to this, please let us know your ideas on how to face this problem, because I mean, in my opinion, I feel like this is something where we just have to distribute the care in as many directions in many places as we can, in order to be able to do that, because you're going to have larger institutions overseeing millions and millions of objects, whereas smaller ones with capable people, well trained, will have to monitor fewer collections. So I don't know, I would love to hear some thoughts about how to manage this.
And to take your earlier theme, John, and go back 100 years, somebody thought of this and got ignored. And that was, this is a paper that was published by Irene Pergroni from Argentina, who is a historian of museums. She pointed out that in 1900, the Egyptologist William Flinders Petrie, who's quite well known in Egyptology, was working at the British Museum and bringing in tons of stuff from the Mideast. And he proposed in 1900 in a paper a national repository for science and art. He wanted to build it on a train line outside of London, a large scale facility with room for expansion for all the museums in London to share a common storage facility. And he envisioned unadorned, fire resistant, one-story buildings, because that eliminated stairs and movement of things. He wanted skylights so they wouldn't have to be lit, because in 1900 electricity was pretty iffy. Skylights for everything. He was going to plant shade trees to control the environment, keep all the objects in closed cabinets. In those days, humidity controls were a lot different. He was going to control them with trays of quicklime, which works fine if you're careful with it. And the big problem he saw was the problem of cataloging, because most cataloging is descriptive. He was going to resolve that by using this brand new technique of photography. And instead of describing objects in great detail, he was going to photograph everything and make those photographs available. And the paper made quite a hit at the time. If you go back and look at the records, it was discussed in the US and in Europe at all kinds of museum meetings for the next 2 years, and then completely forgotten.
Wow.
No one made a move. And at the time, it would have been really inexpensive compared to now to go outside London on the rail line and buy the property and start building these one-story, infinitely expansive buildings. But we need to think about things like that, and we have had a golden opportunity before that we then let pass, which is too bad, because if we'd only listened to Petrie, things could have been a lot different. So I would like to see us avoid that kind of, I hate to call it a blunder, but that kind of blindness to the problem again, and see us really work for something that would work kind of like Petrie's idea, that we look for shared storage, we look for better facilities, we look for ways to communicate better, and all of those things. I think maybe getting together and sharing storage spaces would be a big key. Museums tend to work as islands rather than as interlocking links in a chain, which is what they should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, to use the buzzword of the time, I mean, museums are highly centralized, and what we need to consider is decentralizing them. And think about it this way, in a way, there is an inherent process involved in our museums that decentralizes it, and that's called a loan. Why don't we just loan out
Yeah.
larger portions of our collection? Think about museums that, oh, they're going to do a 2-year renovation, and they ship out as much of their collection as possible because they don't want to have to pay to store it, right? So why don't we consider that more often, right? And then you're storing it and potentially democratizing it. I've got lots of ideas about that, but I want to shift away from it just because it's not about my silly ambitious ideas. But so we're getting towards the end here, and I'm gonna do something off script and challenge John Simmons here. And I didn't tell you about this earlier, so we're gonna play a little game. Since it's the last show of this season, I want to play a little game. I want to see how well you know your own books, your own. See how well you know museum registration method 6 here.
I will tell you right now, I keep my own books right here, right behind me, because I have to look up what I wrote all the time. So do not expect me to do very well in this.
All right. So here's the way this works. I'm going to read you a quote and ask you if it comes from museum registration method 6 or from the other person that I mentioned in the quote, right? So,
okay.
So you ready for this?
No.
And, John, you'll get first stab at it, but then Amanda and Robin, if you want to chime in, please, by all means. So, all right, here's the first one. MRM6 or Einstein? All right. Education is what remains after one has forgotten what one has learned in school.
I would say Einstein.
Correct. Very good.
If I would have been prepped for this, I would have had a ding noise or something prepped, or like an alarm bell.
I wanted it to be a surprise.
That's similar to one of my favorite quotes, which is attributed to Samuel Johnson, which is there are 2 kinds of information, that which we know and that which we know where to look up.
That's perfect. That is perfect. All right, here's another one. MRM6 or Toni Morrison? Definitions belong to the definers, not the defined.
Oh, I would say Toni Morrison.
Amanda? I see you pulling out things great and small. Is that what you just did?
No, maybe.
Robin, do you have a guess?
I have no idea.
Definitely Toni Morrison.
Toni Morrison. Oof.
Yeah.
That's very elegant. It had to be Toni Morrison.
Yeah, right.
That's true.
MRM6 or Pablo Escobar? Life is full of surprises, some good, some not so good. Who wrote the disaster chapter?
Probably MRM6.
Yeah.
Amanda?
It's probably Paisley
I don't
Cato.
know. I mean, I've been watching a lot of Narcos lately. That could be Pablo Escobar.
It is Pablo Escobar.
Oh.
his latent career. Nobody knew that those hippos, he was a zookeeper.
That's what he was talking about. It's the hippos.
All right. MRM6 or Mary Shelley? The living specimen must arrive at its final destination alive and in good health.
That's actually MRM6. That's the chapter on living collections.
Yeah, correct. It's written by Laura A. Morse. Very good.
Yeah, that would have prevented the brain from Abby normal from being put into Frankenstein had they.
Exactly. I was hoping to trip you up with that. All right. We can do a few more here. I came up with 10, but they're fun to talk about as well. All right.
I should add the chat is playing along too. So that's
good.
Oh, good.
I hope someone's keeping score for the chat.
All right. So this next one, let's see what the chat says in response. So think about your answer, but John, don't say it out loud just yet. All right. So MRM6 or Tupac? Things will never be the same. That's just the way it is.
Now we need the Jeopardy music.
Yeah, exactly. Here's another one, and I'll come back to these as well. MRM6 or Maya Angelou? All objects, sooner or later, begin to break down and deteriorate. All right, so
Wait, say the last one again.
All objects, sooner or later, begin to break down and deteriorate.
You could have put museum workers in that instead of object. It's very similar since that's the
Exactly.
phase I am now entering. So,
All right. So for the first one, MRM6 and Tupac, any responses?
We got some Tupacs.
Yeah.
that popped up.
I wrote down Tupac.
Okay, good.
Yes, that was
Good job.
very obvious, I felt.
Okay, good. And then the second one, MRM6 or Maya Angelou?
What'd the chat say?
What'd the chat say?
They're still stuck on Tupac. Hold on. Like, MRM6.
Yeah, for sure. Robin, you have any response to that one?
Yeah, that was the chapter I wrote. That's why I was like, say that again.
All right. Here's a good one. MRM6 or Charles Darwin. The study of collections can reveal much about the collector's worldview, and about heritage and the history of human cultures. And here's one. This will be our last one here. MRM6 or Banksy. Remember, crime against property is not real crime. People look at an oil painting and admire the use of brushstrokes to convey meaning. People look at a graffiti painting and admire the use of a drain pipe to gain access. All right, so for the first one, MRM6 or Charles Darwin. It's Charles Darwin, right, John?
It's MRM6.
Everybody get that one right? They better have.
Yep, the chat saying MRM6.
Yeah, that was John Simmons' chapter. So I'm glad he got that right. And for the other one, the Banksy one, that one's kind of obvious, right? I thought about not including the drain pipe thing just because
If you'd left the drain pipe out, you would have had people.
Yeah. But I wanted to be true to the quotes. So, Robin, any last questions or comments from the chat?
No, the chat has devolved into OSTAT 2-pack, MRM6, Darwin, Banksy. So
This is great. We should do this at some future social.
Oh, perfect.
And stretch it out a bit to a wider group of books.
I have more of these. I didn't use them all, but all right. Well, all right, John. Last question / comment about what's been going on. Any big predictions you want to make about where we're coming down the future? You've already said that larger collections managed by fewer people. That's sort of your big pronouncement. Anything else?
I think doing more with less. I think we will also find that we can make more sustainable storage environments by making them more passive, and by turning off the power on weekends and other times. I think we're headed well into looking at preventive conservation in a very new light, which will be far more sustainable in the future. And I would like to see a complete rethink of storage furniture, which is copied on house furniture rather than copied on ways to arrange our objects for ease of monitoring. But those are the big things I see. The only other thing I would bring up is I would encourage everyone, if you have not done so, to read the book Active Collections. I think active collecting has a lot. I don't agree with everything in the book, but I think it has a lot of really good ideas in it, particularly about the rate that we are collecting objects and should we continue to acquire them at that rate, and rethinking how much stuff we have in our museums that we are not using, and are there things that could be better put back on the open market or sent to other institutions. So reduce the size of collections a bit. I think we are still focused on our collection's bigger than yours rather than our collection is more usable than yours.
All right, you made the segue for me. So summer's coming up. We need some beach reads. What are some books that you recommend that have just come out? Some recent literature on the subject. We'll include these in our description and with the both the video and the podcast?
Well, there is the new Preventive Conservation Collection Storage, which is a fabulous book. I am a contributor, but even so, it's still a fabulous book. The Heather Hope Curavilla's Legal Dictionary for Museum Professionals just came out in a second edition. Really clear explanation of complicated legal issues. There's a new book I've not seen yet by Susan Smith Bautista called How to Close a Museum, which I imagine I did see a preview of that book. It looks like it will be really good. There is a new second edition of To Give and Receive, a handbook for collection gifts and donations for museums and donors, which should be good. There's a fine art movement and storage project management for the visual arts, which again, I have not seen. It's Chuck Agro, but should be good. There is one called Museum Mercenary, a handbook for independent museum professionals. Came out in 2020 by Rebecca Migdal. I've not seen it either, but that's certainly an area a lot more of us are working independently than in the past. And the other one I would mention is the second edition of the famous On the Road Again, Developing and Managing Traveling Exhibitions. It's the Buck and Gilmore book, but this time Rebecca and Jean have brought in Irene Torrens as well as the third author. So those are the ones that I'm keeping an eye out for that all ought to be good summer reading.
Perfect.
That's of course boring a new murder mystery set in a museum. We could really use one of those.
Exactly.
The curator did it, by the way. not to spoil it. But.
Yeah, exactly. Duh. I wanted to get to natural history collections today, but we're already at the hour mark. John, can you tell us where to find your information and in everything that you write about at Museologica, right?
Museologica, and yeah, my website is badly out of date, but you can get me on LinkedIn. You can email me directly. I have an author page on Amazon.com for books I've either written or contributed to, and can be
Perfect.
reached any of those ways.
And what's
through, of course, through ARCS, through
Yeah.
their was it the Find a Registrar? What's it?
Yeah,
Own Contract.
On contract,
The
yeah.
Own Contract section
On
of
contract.
ARCS. I'm listed there.
And what's the Museological website?
I'm not even going to tell you because it's so badly out of date.
Okay, gotcha. If you're out there and want to update his website, please get in contact with him through the ARCS website, so not through the Museological website. All right. Well, thanks again so much for joining us, John. Your insight is so appreciated. It's so interesting to be able to use your knowledge of history to anticipate what we're doing as we move forward. So we greatly appreciate you joining us on ARCS Chat, and we greatly appreciate everyone who has been listening, not only to this episode, but throughout the season. It means a lot to us, and we hope to be able to continue updating our field with new information and new guests as we move forward. We've already begun planning for the next season, which would begin in September. Am I correct? And we're hoping to even bring in some new faces to bring some fresh energy and ideas to what we do. So thanks so much to everyone for making this all possible. And anyone else have anything to add? Any closing statements?
Thank you all very much. It was fun. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful. And we want to say thanks to John. He has been on the ARCS board for the past. John Simmons has been on the ARCS board. He's rolling off. We're very sad about it, but we know we can always reach out to him and say thank you. There's a couple other board members who are rolling off that I'm just going to do quick shout outs to. Sherry Summers and
Aw.
Danielle Bennett are both rolling off. We're going to miss them all.
Yeah.
So, but we have new people joining us too. So if you missed that ARCS update, please let me know. Check it out. We'll have an updated board listing. I want to welcome the new folks, but a huge thanks to everyone who served on the board.
Publish their emails so we can spam them.
Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can get the podcast and all the various places that you can download podcasts. Thanks to this ARCS Chat team again for putting together great programming. Amanda, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off?
It's been a crazy season. I'm grateful for everyone that's participated and followed us along. I hope next year is even better.
Yep, exactly.
Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
everyone.
We'll put the podcast out this Friday, and then we'll sign off for a couple of months, and think of some other things to talk about. And unless something crazy and dramatic comes up in the summer where we have to put something out, right?
Happy
So
All right, everyone. Have a safe summer, and we will see you in the fall.